Good morning. I'm both grateful to each of you who has come this morning and indebted as well. Throughout the days and weeks and months of each year, I'm always anxious to be able to locate something of meaning that I could share with you. Your coming here this morning gratifies and ratifies my anxiety, my desire to serve. Thank you. And welcome. This is the second of a two-part talk, Why I Don't Believe in Death. Hear me well? Good. I'll recap a little bit that I tried to frame the first part by talking about the importance of belief. That the things that we believe are really deeply important because they translate ultimately into behavior. We see a lot of behavior that we wish we did not see. And we can trace back bad behavior to unsound or ill-gotten beliefs, wrong beliefs. So the weeding of the garden of our beliefs is a very important project. I want to talk a little bit about that again to frame this second part. Those of you who've heard me speak before, who know me, know that before I came to First UU to serve as minister here, I worked at Harry Hines Memorial Hospice as a chaplain. I worked with the actively dying. I worked in what is like the intensive care unit of the hospice, the place where we had 15 beds and people came to die. They were actively dying. It was a time of great stress and upheaval, in some cases great fear, and in other cases real joy in people's lives. And I was on the front lines. I was a shepherd in the trenches. And I came to that hospice work with the belief in survival of death. And it equipped me in ways that I want to go through to show the importance of belief. One of the things that really stimulated the flourishing of hospice care among medical people, it was often seen by sensitive nurses, sensitive doctors, sensitive caregivers, that people were often placed in horrible distress because of not getting palliative care. And without having their pain lessened, people suffered unthinkably. So in hospice, you would think that you would see people freed of that, and we did, but often enough, I would see people, family members, deprive their loved ones of palliative care because they were so anxious to make sure that the person didn't die. To prolong the life as long as was medically possible. And they would actually sometimes terminate the hospice care, the palliative care, and bring them into some kind of theater of surgical or other kind of radical, intrusive medical intervention that placed their loved one in agony. We had a joke for that, those of us who believed in survival of death. Picture the spirit of somebody who was kept on life support for a very, very long time against their wishes. And then they finally die. And they're at the pearly gates with St. Peter. You wouldn't believe what I had to go through to get here. Because of a belief in survival of death, I was able to encourage people to let their loved ones go. Because, to me, death is not the end. Also, there are many people on the threshold of death who are overwhelmed by remorse. Things that they feel they didn't do that they ought to have done. Ways in which they hurt people or let people down. Or they let their own self down. They didn't accomplish the things that they wished to accomplish. And the remorse just consumes them in a kind of agony. How encouraging to be offered the idea that there's another chance. Yes, you have so much that you didn't accomplish and now your body is practically done, but perhaps you will discover that there is another side, that when you leave the body, you continue to live. Deeply encouraging. And many times I was able to bring that encouragement to receptive hearts who thrived as a result of it. And then there's another category of persons in agony on the threshold of death. People who bought that ticket that said, hell and damnation forever, burning fire, horrible pit, and you're going there. There are people I met who were really, really deeply afraid that that was their situation, that they were going to go to hell and they were going to suffer eternally and there'd be no reprieve. And if I felt that there was avenue by which I could bring that message, that, there are many, many chances, and God would be monstrous if God condemned a repentant soul crying out in agony, please forgive me, I didn't know, I really didn't know, this is terrible. And again, I found that I was able effectively to encourage people and help people overcome that fear. There's another way in which my belief in survival of death was very, very helpful. It pertains to me as a server, as somebody who was providing care for people. I saw a lot of things that were very, very distressing. I saw people in conditions of suffering that were so awful, you don't want to recount them to others. You don't want to come home and narrate it to your wife. You don't want to pick up the phone and tell your friends. It's awful, sometimes, what people go through. And when I would view people in that situation, when I would imagine this could overtake me, I was comforted by the thought that after the night comes the day, and after the day comes the night, and after birth comes death, and after death comes birth. This idea comforted me, and it gave me strength to carry on. I was able to recover my joy and my sense of hope because of this belief. Now, when I talked about beliefs before, and I hope to return to this effectively later in this talk, I tried to be emphatic that we believe things for a variety of reasons, and it's not always because what we believe is true, or that we know that what we believe is true. It may be that we hope that what we believe is true. It may be that we find that believing it is so nourishing and gives so much solace that we believe it, despite the fact that we can't prove it or disprove it. So I think that's an important thing, and I'm going to return to that later. But belief is important, and the belief in survival of death allowed me to be effective in the theater of hospice care because I was able to help people who were in remorse, people who were in fear of hell and damnation, families who could not let their loved one, who had no good quality of life left, they could not let them go because they thought, I would be murdering. And there's, then there's no more life. And I was able to sustain my service for year after year after year because I was and am certain that there's a glory in the soul that people intuitively grasp. And it's announced in so many statements of Scripture, of philosophical treatises, of the pronouncements of notable women and men throughout history. So I want to go to some of those again. I'm recapping a little bit. I have some quotes. And this time I won't share as many. I share a lot of quotes, but I just have a couple today to share. This one from Henry Ford, and it's kind of lengthy. I think it's nice to share. He's a practical man, an industrialist. Again, I'm not endorsing that, because Henry Ford believed it, it's great, and it's true. Henry Ford, if you research, was anti-Semitic in a way that was very disgraceful and unacceptable to me, and I think a kind of blemish on his record. But he's a complex person like all of us. He had his pluses and his minuses. So here's what he had to say about survival of death. I am in exact accord with the belief of Thomas Edison that spirit is immortal. That there is a continuing center of character in each personality. But I don't know what spirit is, nor matter either. I suspect they're forms of the same thing. I could never see anything in this reputed antagonism between spirit and matter. To me, this is the most beautiful, the most satisfactory from a scientific standpoint, the most logical theory of life. For 30 years, I've leaned toward the theory of reincarnation. It seems a most reasonable philosophy and explains many things. No, I have no desire to know what or who I was once, or what or who I shall be in the ages to come. This belief in immortality makes present living the more attractive. It gives you all the time that is. You will always be able to finish what you start. There's no fever or strain in such an outlook. We're here in life for one purpose, to get experience. We are all getting it, and we shall use it somewhere. And this one I read from Ford last time. It's interesting. I adopted the theory of reincarnation when I was 26. So he was admitting in that first thing that I read that he struggled with it. Yes, I believe it. No, I'm struggling with this. I adopted the theory of reincarnation when I was 26. Religion offered nothing to the point. Interesting. Even work could not give me complete satisfaction. Work is futile if we cannot utilize the experience we collect in one life in the next. When I discovered reincarnation, time was no longer limited. I was no longer a slave to the hands of the clock. I would like to communicate to others the calmness that the long view of life gives to us. Now, a short quote from Robert Graves, the great poet who wrote The White Goddess and many wonderful poems. White Goddess meaning the moon, and he was celebrating the feminine divine and in all her phases of manifestation. Excellent book. So, Robert Graves, no honest theologian, therefore, can deny that his acceptance of Jesus as Christ logically binds every Christian to a belief in reincarnation. In Elias' case, who was later John the Baptist, at least. Now, maybe I need to unpack that. When Jesus was asked his identity, Jesus said, well, who do people say that I am? And so his disciples recited, oh, they say this, and they say that, and they say the other. And then Jesus speaks in a way that makes them realize that he is saying that he was the prophesied person to come after the prophet Elias was to come again. Elias, who had lived hundreds of years before and who had died, would come again, and then another was prophesied to follow in his footsteps. And the disciples understood that Jesus was talking of John the Baptist. Jesus was asserting that John the Baptist was the reincarnation of Elias. So this is what Robert Graves is talking about, and it's what the famous Christian theologian Geddes McGregor talks about in his literature. So I promised that I would give you some anecdotes. And I have a few, 4 in fact, and so let me start with the first. Someone who I hoped would be here. He told me he would if he could, and he wasn't, but I met him here, and we worked together a long time. Man I love. And he had the experience with his wife of many years of being submerged in a sensory deprivation tank. Voluntarily, by the way. He wanted the experience. For those who don't know, you go into water that's like body temperature in a completely dark room. The water is made buoyant, I don't know, perhaps by salt or something. You can't sink into it. The room is soundproofed. There's no light whatsoever in it. When you're floating in this water, you're actually just left with your mind, with your consciousness. And it's thought to be a very healing methodology to enter into this. So he was in the sensory deprivation tank. And his wife was in another tank, in an adjacent room. But the rooms were locked, and people could not enter the room while you were in your session. And everyone is instructed that, you do this alone and you have this conscious experience. So after a little while, my friend found himself in his wife's tank with her. He said, I was there from the waist up. And I was looking at her, and she was looking at me, and she said, what are you doing here? We are supposed to be doing this alone. Get out of here. So he did. And later, he thought, I won't say anything. And when they were dressed and talking about the experience, she said, why did you come in my tank like that? I thought we were supposed to do this alone. Now, in telling me the anecdote, he told me, it doesn't mean that I believe necessarily in reincarnation and this, that, and the other. I just know this. I entered my wife's tank, and it wasn't in my body. And I didn't say anything to my wife about it, and she asked me why I did that. She saw it, and I experienced it. That's the number 1 anecdote. Number 2 anecdote. I worked at the hospice, and I heard several a year stories of people who had out-of-body, near-death experiences. I'm just going to tell you one. It was very startling, and here's an aside about belief. Sometimes the things that I believe, I say, did I really have that experience? Do I really believe that? That's unbelievable. I don't believe that. But I do believe that. Okay. This is that kind of story. It's like, this was told to me by somebody that I looked at and evaluated as this person is a well-adjusted, sane, responsible, kind of ordinary person, not a nutcase. I meet enough of those, okay? This person struck me as really okay. And we got to know each other while her loved one was dying, and that's when people would begin to open up and tell me stuff. And this person told me that she went to bed one night and she had a dream. And in the dream, her friend came to her and said, I've been murdered. And my body is in the trunk of my car. And my boyfriend is the culprit who did this. And I want you to go to the police and tell them. And she woke up from the dream and she thought, oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy. I'm supposed to go to the police and say this? They'll think I'm a nutcase. I don't know. But she said it was such a convincing dream. It was so vivid. She had to do it. And she went and she said, you're going to think this is crazy, but I had this dream and my girlfriend said, and blah, blah, blah. And the police went, she said, and they discovered the body. And they apprehended the boyfriend. And he was tried and convicted. That's the second anecdote. Okay, I want to read to you something. When I teach meditation classes, and by the way, this is an ad for my upcoming meditation class, team taught with Jakub Omski, first cellist of the Philharmonica, to begin sometime in February. We're working on it. When I teach meditation classes, sometimes I try to do what the White Queen was trying to do for Alice. If you didn't see my last talk, go online. It's there, and you'll hear the story. But, practice stretching your mind. Practice wrestling with ideas that you've rejected and wrestle with them again and see if maybe you get a different outcome this time. The book is called Many Lives, Many Masters. It's written by Brian Weiss. The reason I like to recommend it to people is Brian Weiss graduated from Ivy League schools, either summa cum laude or, top grades, distinguished himself in his intellectual pursuits, went on to become medical director of a major medical center on the East Coast, had many papers published, was very, very well respected by his colleagues in the medical field. Self-proclaimed atheist, did not believe in survival of death. And then he had an experience with one of the people that he was working with that just kind of blew his mind. I'm going to read from his book. His patient in a hypnotic trance is speaking to him, and she says, "Your father is here and your son, who is a small child. Your father says you will know him because his name is Avram, and your daughter is named after him. Also, his death was due to his heart. Your son's heart was also important, for it was backward, like a chicken's. He made a great sacrifice for you out of his love. His soul is very advanced. His death satisfied his parents' debts. Also, he wanted to show you that medicine could only go so far, that its scope is very limited." Now, I'm not going to read a whole lot more. I'll try to summarize why that was significant to Dr. Weiss. Number one, his father assumed the name Alvin. Avram was his birth name, and he wanted to assimilate into the American culture that he migrated from old Europe to, and drop his Judaic traditional name, and Alvin was the name that everybody knew him as. Here's his patient in a hypnotic trance referring to his father by a name that she couldn't possibly have known. The father died of massive heart failure, and she mentions that. The doctor who wrote the book had a son who died 23 days or some few days after his birth because his heart had a condition that 1 in like 10 million Brits have, where the blood flows backwards. And although they tried surgical intervention, the child died. And when the child died, Dr. Weiss, who was going to be a medical doctor, said, "To hell with being a medical doctor. Medicine couldn't help my father, and medicine couldn't help my child. I want to go into psychiatry," and that's what he did. So, again, I'll read the quote. "Your father is here, and your son, who is a small child. Your father says that you will know him because his name is Avram, and your daughter is named after him." The family named their daughter Amy after Alvin, Avram. "Also, his death was due to his heart. Your son's heart was also important, for it is backward, like a chicken's. He made a great sacrifice for you out of his love. His soul is very advanced. His death satisfied his parents' debts. Also, he wanted to show you that medicine could only go so far, that its scope is very limited." And on the next page, after describing the things that I tried to summarize for you, in a very excited state, he's reflecting back on that excitement that he felt. "Here, in 1982, in my quiet, darkened office, a deafening cascade of hidden, secret truths was pouring upon me. I was swimming in a spiritual sea, and I loved the water. My arms were gooseflesh. Catherine could not possibly know this information. There was no place even to look it up. My father's Hebrew name, that I had a son who died in infancy from a 1 in 10 million heart defect, my brooding about medicine, my father's death, and my daughter's naming, it was too much, too specific, too true. This unsophisticated laboratory technician was a conduit for transcendental knowledge, and if she could reveal these truths, What else was there? I needed to know more. And then he proceeds to explain that he studied everything he could get his hands on, because he said, I'm an atheist, I don't believe any of this. But now I've had this experience, I have to satisfy my mind and intelligence about how could it be. It's a good book. The last anecdote I want to read is from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, from her book on life after death, a collection of essays. So imagine that she'd heard the anecdotes that I just said. And she says in her essay called Living and Dying, all of this is naturally no proof for a skeptic. And in order to calm down the skeptics, we did a scientific project with blind people. Our condition was that we would involve only blind people who had not had any light perception for at least the last 10 years. Those who had an out-of-body experience and came back can tell you in detail what colors and jewelry you were wearing if you were present. Furthermore, they can tell you the color and pattern of their sweater or of their tie and so on. You understand that these statements refer to facts which one cannot invent? You can reject the facts, providing you are not afraid of the answers. However, if you are afraid of them, then you may come to me, like some of those skeptics, and tell me that those out-of-body experiences are the result of a lack of oxygen. Of course, if it were only a matter of a lack of oxygen, I would prescribe it for all of my blind patients. She goes on to make her case that, and I mentioned this last time, people often believe things because it serves some ulterior motive. Because it protects them, it keeps them in a safety zone where they want to remain, even though they know that what they believe can't be true, or that there's lots of compelling evidence that they ought to rethink it. So, I'm just going to insert a story that I love. I'm studying the Baal Shem Tov now. Baal Shem Tov was the founder of Hasidim in the Jewish tradition, a great revivalist of Judaism. And so one of his critics was saying, why is it that the Hasidim burst into song and dance at the slightest provocation? Is this the behavior of a healthy and sane individual? To which he responded with a story. Once a musician came to town, a musician of great but unknown talent. He stood on a street corner and he began to play. Those who stopped to listen could not tear themselves away, and soon a large crowd stood enthralled by the glorious music, whose equal they had never heard. Before long, they were moving to its rhythm, and the entire street was transformed into a dancing mass of humanity. A deaf man walking by wondered, has the world gone mad? Why are the townspeople jumping up and down, waving their arms and turning in circles in the middle of the street? Hasidim, concluded the Baal Shem Tov, are moved by the melody that issues forth from every creature in God's creation. If this makes them appear mad to those with less sensitive ears, should they therefore cease to dance? A couple more quotes from the Bhagavad Gita. That which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy the imperishable soul. For the soul there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever-existing, primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. So I want to wind up now, and I want to talk about the fact that I think that my self-care, with its self-care, requires of us, or includes, hope as a condition of the mind. And, you know, I have a guru, after whom our son Tamal is named. Tamal Krishna Goswami was my guru. And his guru, which would be called my Param Guru, said something when I was deliberating about this commitment that I made to Vaishnava culture and thought. Because I kept looking at the door like I'm going to exit right through the door as soon as I hear them say, this is the only way. Or everybody else is wrong and we are exclusively right. I was looking at the door constantly thinking, I want to make sure I can get right through it quickly. So Prabhupada, the guru of Tamal Krishna Goswami, he said something that stayed with me. It was a really winning remark. He said, so what if there is no Krishna? Now, Krishna is the nomenclature for God in that culture of the Vaishnavas. So what if there is no God? Does it matter? Look at the way we live. Every day we dance and we sing and we play musical instruments together. It's so much fun. And then we have sumptuous food that's really delicious that we get without any violence and without any deceit or exploitation. And we share very generously of that food. And what if there is no Krishna? Look at the way we're living. It's so wonderful. When I heard that, I thought, oh boy, this is great. This is really great. Here is a dedicated spiritual master, a mentor of worldwide influence, who's comfortable with ambivalence, who's not afraid to say, I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I really don't know. I can't convince you. I'm personally convinced. I believe it. And even if it's not true, it's okay. It doesn't matter. I thought, terrific! I'm okay. I'm down. So this being comfortable with ambiguity is very typical of Far Eastern thought, which really attracts me to it. And it attracted early Unitarians to it. And interestingly enough, the guru of my guru's guru had a guru, okay? And that guru was fascinated by Unitarians. And in his early adulthood, in his formative years, it was Theodore Parker that he was reading. It was William Channing that he was reading. It was Emerson that he was reading. He wrote to Emerson. He was just so profoundly impressed by the intelligence, the integrity, the progressiveness of Unitarians that he embraced that as his first embrace of spiritual culture. I'll talk about that in another talk sometime in the future. So as a condition of my commitment to self-care, I choose to be hopeful rather than despairing. I choose to believe, number one, my own intuition, that I am an eternal person, and that all these teachers who come forward and say this, and all these scriptures that say that, they're not baloney. I choose to believe that. It's a choice that I make because it makes me, as I said at the top of my talk, able to comfort people, able to comfort myself, able to be hopeful. I also choose to hope that all of those Edison and Ford and Emerson and Margaret Fuller and all of these people who made pronouncements about spiritual survival, I hope that they're right. I choose to believe that they're right because it gives me hope to go forward. I want to be in their company. So, a couple of things. I want to end with a kind of benediction. There's a saying, watch your thoughts for they become words, watch your words, they become actions, watch your actions for they become habits, watch your habits for they become your character, watch your character for it becomes your destiny. Sometimes attributed to the Upanishads, sometimes attributed to Lao Tzu, repeated oftentimes from so many different quarters. So the benediction is from the Dhammapada of the Buddhist canon. The Dhammapada has as its first opening what are called the twin verses. They're so beautiful, they're elegant. And they pertain to this, and they are founded in part on the belief that we survive the death of our bodies, that we are an imperishable witness to the phenomena of this world. I'm not going to read the whole of the twin verses, but I'm going to read maybe a third of them. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It's founded on our thoughts. It's made up of our thoughts. If one speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows, as the wheel follows the foot of the ox that draws the carriage. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. If one speaks or acts with a pure thought, happiness follows, like a shadow that never leaves. He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. And those who harbor such thoughts, hatred will never cease. He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. And those who do not harbor such thoughts, hatred will cease. For hatred does not cease by hatred at any time. Hatred ceases by love. This is an old rule. And then skipping ahead. As rain breaks through an ill-thatched house, passion will break through an unreflecting mind. As rain does not break through a well-thatched house, passion will not break through a well-reflecting mind. The evildoer mourns in this world, and he mourns in the next. There's where, it's founded on this idea of survival of death. Mourns in this world, mourns in the next. He mourns in both. He mourns and suffers when he sees the evil of his own work. The virtuous person delights in this world and delights in the next, delights in both. That person delights and rejoices when viewing the purity of their works. The virtuous man is happy in this world and he's happy in the next. He's happy in both. He's happy when he thinks of the good he has done. He is still more happy when going on the good path. So, like I said, why would I want to make you believe something? I struggle with my beliefs. Half the time, when I reflect on what I believe, I think, is that right? Do I believe that? Is it true? And I'll admit, sometimes about the most important things, I don't exactly know. I don't exactly know. But the people I've admired most are the people who are committed to love, to kindness, to good treatment to others. And that's what this church is all about. That's what has kind of targeted Unitarians and Universalists as weirdos or heretics or, candidates for hell. Is because more important than dogma, doctrine, belief, we think we should be good people. We should be agents of love. We should reach out to those who are broken and suffering and do something to mend the brokenness and lift the suffering. And if God narrative can do that, God narrative it is. And if food can do that, then food it is. And if a kind word or a joke can be that, then a kind word or a joke it is. So, I think that the message of hope that's inherent in the concept of survival of death should be part of your bag of tricks that you carry with you as you walk down the road of life. Thank you very much for indulging this person.